My sister was bullied for looking dead in her yearbook photo, so I taught her skincare. But she became obsessed with a gray layer of tiredness under her eyes and started using acupuncture needles on her face until I found her. At 3 a.m., cutting a flap of skin below her eye with Dad's X-Acto knife while humming our childhood lullaby. Then after she got out of the hospital, she chased me onto the roof with scalpels she'd been practicing with on pigskin, saying she could see the tiredness in my face too and needed to cut it out. I was walking past the bathroom when I heard Ellie crying in the shower. I let myself in and found her curled on the floor, clutching her yearbook to her wet chest. Megan had told everyone at lunch that Ellie looked like a walking corpse in her photo. That night, I found her studying her face in the mirror with a flashlight under her chin. She kept whispering that she really did look dead. I offered to teach her how to use concealer to brighten her under eyes, and her face lit up like I'd just saved her life. The next morning, I showed her my makeup routine, and she was hooked. We soon started watching tutorials, and Sunday face masks became our thing. I loved seeing her confidence come back. Her boyfriend said she was glowing, and she seemed genuinely happy. She threw herself into skincare completely. 8 hours of sleep, a gallon of water, researching serums for hours. I was proud she was taking care of herself instead. There was one weird thing, though. It was how often she checked her reflection. Every surface became a mirror. Spoons, windows, her phone screen. When I caught her measuring her under eye area with a ruler and taking notes, I just laughed and teased her about being thorough. For her birthday, I bought her this expensive eye cream. Our parents thought I was being the sweetest sister ever. Then things started getting weird. One morning, Ellie burst into our room and showed me what she'd done. She'd plucked out every single one of her lower eyelashes. I stared at her in shock while she explained that eyelashes cast shadows and removing them eliminated the tired look. She was so proud of herself. A week later, she made me watch her insert acupuncture needles under her eyes. She hummed while pushing them deeper, and my stomach turned. When she offered to do mine, I refused. She just shrugged and said I'd eventually beg her for help once I saw the results. Her face grew more swollen each day. Red dots covered her under eyes that she desperately hid with concealer. I tried hiding her needles during her showers, but she caught me one day and grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks. She threatened to show Mom my diary if I didn't return them. After that, she stopped eating with us, claiming that chewing made the tiredness spread. I found her treatment journal under her mattress with injection sites mapped like constellations. The progress photos documented increasing damage that she labeled as improvement. When I tried showing Mom the journal, Ellie appeared instantly and smoothly convinced her it was psychology research. Mom actually praised her dedication to school. 3 weeks later, I woke up at 3 a.m. to find Ellie's bed empty. Light leaked from under the bathroom door along with wet tearing sounds. My heart pounded as I pushed it open. I found Ellie hunched over the sink with Dad's X-Acto knife. She'd already cut a flap of skin below her left eye and was peeling it back with tweezers. Blood dripped steadily while she hummed our childhood lullaby. I stood frozen in the doorway. "Come in, Jess." Close the door. Her calm voice made my skin crawl. She didn't look up from her work, just kept peeling with steady hands. The bathroom smelled like copper and rubbing alcohol. "See the gray underneath? That's the tired layer. 2 millimeters deep, exactly where I calculated." She tilted her head to show me. The skin flap hung loose, blood running down her cheek. She seemed completely unbothered by the pain. Then she reached down and pulled out a mason jar filled with bits of skin floating in clear liquid. My legs went weak. "I've been practicing on my thighs for months." She pulled up her pajama pants. Both legs were covered in precise cuts in various stages of healing. Some fresh, some scabbed, some scarred white. Each one perfectly measured. I finally screamed. Our parents crashed through the door. Dad lunged for the knife while Mom stood frozen with her phone. Ellie didn't fight him. She just sighed like we were interrupting crucial work. "You're ruining the precision. I planned this for months." Blood covered the sink, the floor, her hands. Mom dialed 911 with shaking fingers while Dad held Ellie's wrists. She stayed eerily calm through it all. When the paramedics arrived, she looked directly at me. "Tell them about the tiredness, Jess. You see it too." They found notebooks filled with facial anatomy drawings and documented practice cuts. Pages showed dates, depths, healing times, excerpts from medical textbooks. She'd been studying surgical techniques for months. They sedated her for transport. As the substances took effect, she kept asking if anyone else could see the gray layer under their skin. The hospital kept her for 2 months. When she came home, our parents removed every mirror and hid anything sharp. Ellie seemed better. She took her pills, went to therapy, even apologized. I started sleeping again. Then last Tuesday, I woke to find her leaning over me with a sewing needle she'd hidden. "Jess, I can see the tiredness in your face now." She smiled. "Don't worry, I learned exactly where to cut." I dropped the needle and scrambled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ellie followed me step by step, her movements slow and deliberate. The hallway light cast shadows across her face, making the scars under her eyes look deeper. She'd been home for 3 days, and I'd foolishly believed the worst was over. My back hit the wall. Ellie stopped inches from my face, studying me with that same clinical detachment she'd shown in the bathroom months ago. Her fingers traced the air near my cheekbones, mapping invisible lines. I held my breath, afraid any movement might trigger something worse. Mom's footsteps thundered up the stairs. Ellie smoothly palmed the needle and turned toward the door, her expression shifting to confusion. By the time Mom burst in, Ellie was rubbing her eyes and yawning. Mom looked between us, her face tight with worry. I opened my mouth to explain, but Ellie spoke first. She apologized for sleepwalking again, claiming the new medication made her disoriented at night. Mom's shoulders sagged with relief. She guided Ellie back to bed, whispering reassurances. I stood frozen against the wall long after they left. The needle had vanished completely. When I checked Ellie's bed later, I found nothing. She'd hidden it somewhere new, somewhere I'd never think to look. The next morning, Ellie acted perfectly normal at breakfast. She took her pills without complaint, discussed her therapy homework, even laughed at Dad's terrible jokes. Our parents exchanged hopeful glances over their coffee. Only I noticed how she kept touching her face, fingers ghosting over the same spots she'd mapped on me the night before. After breakfast, I searched her room while she showered. I checked inside books, behind furniture, under loose floorboards. Nothing. The shower turned off, and I quickly straightened everything. Ellie emerged wrapped in a towel, water dripping from her hair. She smiled at me, and something in that smile made my stomach turn. That afternoon, I found her in the garage, organizing Dad's toolbox. She explained she was helping him find a missing screwdriver. Her movements were casual, unhurried, but I saw how her fingers lingered on certain tools, testing edges and points. When she noticed me watching, she asked if I wanted to help. I made an excuse and left. Over the next few days, Ellie's behavior grew increasingly genuinely unsettling. She started following me around the house, always maintaining a careful distance. When I did homework, she sat across the room, pretending to read while stealing glances. During meals, she watched me eat with intense focus. At night, I'd wake to find her standing in my doorway, silhouetted against the hall light. I tried talking to our parents, but Ellie had perfected her act. Whenever they were around, she transformed into the model patient. She attended therapy sessions, participated in family activities, took her medication religiously. Dr. Martinez called her progress remarkable. Our parents started relaxing their vigilance, but I knew better. I saw the way she studied her reflection in spoons when she thought no one was looking. I noticed the small red marks appearing on her thighs again. I caught her pressing her fingers against her under eyes, testing the skin's elasticity. The obsession hadn't disappeared. It had evolved. One evening, I discovered her journal hidden inside an old stuffed animal. The entries were different now, more sophisticated. Instead of crude drawings, she'd sketched detailed facial anatomy. Medical terminology filled the pages. She'd been researching plastic surgery techniques, documenting recovery times and potential complications. One entry described her plan to save money for professional procedures once she turned 18. The last entry made my blood run cold. She'd written about her dreams, how she saw everyone's faces melting to reveal the gray layer beneath, how she wanted to help us all, starting with me. The entry ended with a promise to be more careful this time, to wait for the perfect moment when no one could interrupt. I photographed the pages with shaking hands, then carefully returned the journal. That night, I pushed my dresser against my bedroom door. Ellie's footsteps paused outside around midnight. The doorknob turned slowly. When the door wouldn't budge, she knocked softly. I pretended to be asleep. After several minutes, her footsteps retreated. The next day, Mom asked about the dresser. Ellie had mentioned I seemed paranoid lately, barricading myself in my room. Mom's concern was genuine, but I could see doubt creeping into her eyes. Was I the one having problems now? Ellie stood behind her, expression neutral, but I caught the slight upturn of her lips. That afternoon, Ellie cornered me in the laundry room. She pressed close, whispering that she only wanted to help. Her breath was hot against my ear as she described how beautiful I'd look once the tiredness was gone. Well, starting with crying in the shower clutching a yearbook is definitely not where I thought this skincare journey would go. And wow, did it take a sharp left turn from face masks to whatever this became, how grateful I'd be afterward, how we could do it together, sisters helping each other achieve perfection. I shoved past her and ran upstairs. Behind me, she called out that she'd wait as long as necessary, that she understood my fear but promised to be gentle, that she'd practiced enough to make it quick. I started spending more time away from home, libraries, coffee shops, anywhere Ellie couldn't follow, but I couldn't avoid her forever. Our parents grew frustrated with my absence, especially when Ellie played the abandoned sister, hurt by my rejection. They scheduled a family meeting. During the meeting, Ellie broke down crying. She spoke about feeling isolated, how my avoidance triggered her anxiety. She took responsibility for scaring me, but insisted she'd never hurt anyone. The needle incident was a misunderstanding, a moment of confusion from her medication. She begged for another chance, for her little sister's trust. Our parents ate it up. Dad lectured me about supporting family through mental health struggles. Mom reminded me how much Ellie needed stability. They suggested I was projecting my own trauma from that night in the bathroom. Maybe I should talk to someone too. I sat there, trapped between their disappointment and Ellie's performance. She reached across the table, taking my hand. Her grip was firm, possessive. She promised to respect my boundaries while working to rebuild our relationship. Our parents smiled, relieved by this breakthrough. That night, I found a note under my pillow. Ellie's handwriting spelled out a single word: soon. I stopped sleeping. Every shadow could be her. Every creak might be her footsteps. I dozed in short bursts, jolting awake at the slightest sound. Dark circles formed under my eyes, which Ellie noticed immediately. She mentioned them at breakfast, voice dripping with false concern. She offered to share some concealer tips, maybe do my makeup like old times. Our parents thought it was sweet. 3 nights later, I woke to find my dresser moved slightly. The door was cracked open just enough for someone to squeeze through. Ellie's bed was empty. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, when I heard humming from the bathroom. Our childhood lullaby, the same tune from that night. I crept down the hall, phone clutched in my sweaty palm. The bathroom door stood ajar, light spilling out. Through the crack, I saw Ellie examining her face in the mirror. Fresh cuts decorated her jawline, precise and shallow. She dabbed at the blood with cotton balls, humming continuously. She must have sensed me because she spoke without turning. She said she'd been patient, but my dark circles were getting worse. She couldn't stand watching her sister suffer when the solution was so simple. Tonight seemed perfect. Our parents deep asleep, no interruptions. I backed away, but she was already moving. She turned from the mirror, something glinting in her hand. Not the X-Acto knife this time. Something smaller, more precise. A scalpel she'd somehow acquired. She advanced slowly, explaining her technique improvements, how she'd mapped my facial structure while I slept, how she knew exactly where to cut for minimal scarring. I backed into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the carpet. Ellie matched my pace, the scalpel catching the bathroom light. She explained how she'd ordered it online using Mom's credit card, how the medical supply company never questioned a bulk order of surgical instruments. Her voice remained conversational, as if discussing homework rather than assault. My heel hit the top stair. Ellie paused, tilting her head. She reminded me that running would only delay the inevitable, that she'd already proven her patience, that eventually I'd have to sleep, and she'd be waiting. The scalpel twirled between her fingers with practiced ease. I bolted down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Behind me, Ellie's footsteps remained unhurried. She called out that I was being dramatic, that the procedure would take less than 10 minutes if I cooperated, that she'd even use numbing cream this time. The front door was locked, the deadbolt requiring a key from inside. I fumbled with the chain, fingers slipping on the metal. Ellie appeared at the bottom of the stairs, blocking my path to the kitchen and back door. She sighed at my panic, explaining that she'd disabled the garage door opener earlier, that she'd thought through every escape route. I darted into the living room, putting the couch between us. Ellie followed slowly, running her finger along the scalpel's edge. She described how she'd practiced on pigskin from the butcher shop, how the texture was remarkably similar to human tissue, how she'd perfected her technique over dozens of attempts. The room felt smaller with each step she took. I grabbed a lamp, holding it like a weapon. Ellie laughed softly, pointing out that I wouldn't actually hurt her, that we both knew I loved her too much, that this resistance was just fear of change, of improvement. She lunged suddenly, faster than I expected. I swung the lamp, but she ducked under it, the scalpel slicing through my pajama sleeve. The blade left a thin red line on my upper arm. Ellie examined the cut with professional interest, noting that it was too shallow to scar. scar, that she could do better. I threw the lamp at her and ran for the stairs. She deflected it easily, her reflexes sharper than I'd realized. I reached my parents' door and pounded on it, screaming for help. The door was locked. Through the wood, I heard Dad's sleep machine humming steadily. Ellie appeared behind me, explaining that she'd increased the volume on their white noise machine, that she'd also slipped a mild sedative into their evening tea. Nothing dangerous, just enough to ensure they slept deeply. She'd researched the dosage carefully, accounting for their body weights. I sprinted back to my room, slamming the door and shoving the dresser against it. Ellie's weight hit the door immediately. The dresser scraped across the floor, inch by inch. Through the gap, I saw her face, calm and determined. She reminded me that she'd moved this same dresser before, that I was only delaying the inevitable. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, dialing 911. Ellie heard the dial tone and paused her pushing. She explained that she'd already called them twice this week, reporting false emergencies from spoofed numbers, that they'd threatened to fine our parents if it happened again, that my call would seem like another prank. The operator answered. I tried explaining the situation, but Ellie began sobbing loudly outside my door. She wailed about her sister locking her out, about being off her medication, about needing help. Her performance was flawless. The operator asked if I was the one who'd been making false reports. I heard the skepticism in her voice. I hung up and called Dr. Martinez's emergency line. It went straight to voicemail. Ellie laughed through the door, explaining that she'd called earlier, pretending to be mom canceling all appointments due to a family emergency, that she'd been thorough in her preparations. The dresser moved another foot. I searched frantically for weapons, for anything to defend myself. My scissors were safety tipped, useless. The heaviest thing I owned was a textbook. Ellie's face appeared in the widening gap, her expression sympathetic. She promised it would be over quickly if I stopped fighting, that the fear was worse than the actual procedure. I climbed out my window onto the roof. The shingles were cold under my bare feet, the night air raising goosebumps on my arms. Below, the ground looked impossibly far. Ellie's head appeared in the window frame. She reminded me that I was afraid of heights, that I'd never actually jumped, that coming back inside was the sensible choice. She climbed out after me, moving with surprising agility. The scalpel glinted in her hand as she navigated the sloped roof. She explained that she'd been practicing climbing out here too, during my absences, that she knew every loose shingle, every safe foothold. I edged toward the section over the garage where the roof was lower. Ellie followed patiently, describing how she'd calculated the optimal angle for facial incisions, how she'd studied surgical videos frame by frame, how she'd memorized every layer of facial tissue. My foot slipped on dew-slick shingles. I slid several feet before catching myself on the gutter. It groaned under my weight but held. Ellie crouched nearby, extending her free hand as if to help. She suggested we go back inside before someone got hurt, that the roof was dangerous, that she only wanted to help me. I made it to the garage roof and looked for a way down. The ladder Dad usually left out was gone. Ellie explained that she'd put it in the shed earlier, anticipating this route, that she'd removed all the outdoor furniture that might break a fall, that she'd been planning this for weeks. She demonstrated her knowledge by listing every preparation she'd made: the disabled garage door, the sedated parents, the removed ladders, the false 911 calls, the canceled therapy appointments. Each detail revealed the depth of her obsession, the thoroughness of her planning. I contemplated jumping to the grass below. It was only about 12 feet, but the angle was bad. Ellie sat on the roof's edge, swinging her legs casually. She pointed out that a broken ankle would make me helpless, that she could perform the procedure while I was immobilized, that jumping would only make things worse. A car passed on the street below. I screamed for help, waving my arms. The driver never looked up, windows closed against the night air. Ellie explained that she'd tested this earlier in the week, that no one paid attention to roof noises, that everyone assumed it was maintenance or animals. She stood and approached slowly, the scalpel held low and non-threatening. She promised to be gentle, to use all her accumulated knowledge. Ellie's turned stalking into an art form with more planning than a heist movie. She's got backup plans for her backup plans, and somehow made breaking into someone's room sound like a TED talk on surgical techniques. She described how beautiful I'd look afterward, how the dark circles would vanish, how I'd thank her once the healing finished. I grabbed a loose shingle and threw it at her. She sidestepped easily, her balance perfect. The shingle clattered down the roof and fell to the ground. Ellie picked up another one, examining its edge. She noted that it was sharp enough to cut, but too crude for precision work, that she preferred proper tools. The standoff continued as she explained her research into facial anatomy, how she'd discovered that exhaustion manifested in specific tissue layers, how removing those layers would eliminate the appearance of fatigue permanently, how the scarring would be minimal with proper technique. I tried reasoning with her, reminding her of our childhood memories, of how I'd helped her with homework, shared my Halloween candy, defended her from bullies. Ellie nodded along, agreeing that I'd been a wonderful sister, that this was her way of returning the favor, that she was offering me the gift of perfection. She described her vision of our future, how we'd both be beautiful, confident, free from the curse of looking tired, how we'd share this secret, this bond of mutual improvement, how our parents would never understand, but we wouldn't need them to. My arms ached from maintaining balance on the sloped roof. Ellie noticed my fatigue and suggested we resolve this before I fell. She promised to catch me if I slipped, to make sure I was safe before beginning the procedure. Her concern seemed genuine, filtered through her warped perspective. She revealed that she'd been documenting everything in a new journal, that she'd photographed my sleeping face from multiple angles, that she'd created a surgical plan specifically for my facial structure. The detail in her planning was both impressive and terrifying. I spotted movement in the neighbor's window. Mrs. Chen was awake, making her usual midnight snack. I screamed her name, waving frantically. Ellie glanced over, unconcerned. She explained that Mrs. Chen was nearly deaf without her hearing aids, that she'd tested this by playing loud music during previous nights. The temperature dropped, and I shivered in my thin pajamas. Ellie noticed and offered to get me a jacket, to pause this chase and ensure I was comfortable. Her twisted care made everything worse. She genuinely believed she was helping, that her obsession was love. She sat down on the roof, patting the spot beside her. She suggested we talk properly, sister to sister, that she'd explain the procedure in detail so I'd understand. That knowledge would ease my fear. The scalpel rested in her lap, always within reach. I remained standing, muscles tense and ready to move. Ellie began describing her discoveries about facial tissue, how certain layers showed age and exhaustion more prominently, how strategic removal could turn back the clock, how the healing process, while painful, led to remarkable results. She pulled out her phone, showing me photos of her own healing progress. The scars under her eyes had faded to thin white lines. She traced them proudly, explaining how she'd refined her technique with each attempt, how she'd learned from every mistake. The photos revealed the extent of her self-harm. Dozens of healed cuts covered her thighs and arms, each one labeled with dates and measurements. She'd turned her body into a practice canvas, preparing for this moment. The dedication was as horrifying as it was thorough. She explained that she'd started with small incisions, building tolerance for pain, that she'd experimented with different depths and angles, that she'd discovered the optimal pressure for clean cuts. Her voice carried the pride of a researcher discussing breakthrough findings. I tried to edge away, but she stood quickly, matching my movement. She suggested we return inside where it was warm, where she had proper lighting and sterile equipment, where the procedure could be done correctly. The reasonableness in her voice made it worse. She revealed that she'd been adding supplements to my food. Nothing harmful, just vitamins to promote healing, collagen for skin elasticity, zinc for wound repair. She'd been preparing my body without my knowledge, ensuring optimal results. The violation of trust hit harder than any physical threat. Every meal we'd shared, every drink she'd offered, had been part of her plan. She saw my reaction and assured me it was from love, that she wanted my healing to be as smooth as possible. She described how she'd practiced suturing on store-bought chicken skin, how she'd learned to minimize scarring through precise stitching, how she'd acquired medical-grade sutures online. The level of preparation revealed months of planning. A dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood. Ellie glanced toward the sound, calculating distances. She noted that the Johnsons' dog always barked at cats, that no one would investigate, that we were truly alone in this moment. She suggested we could do this together, that I could help with her next procedure while she worked on me, that we could perfect the technique as a team. The idea of participating in her delusions made my stomach turn. She pulled out a small vial from her pocket. Numbing cream, she explained, medical grade, acquired through the same suppliers. She promised to use plenty, to minimize discomfort. Her consideration for my pain only highlighted her inability to see the real harm. I made a desperate dash for the far end of the roof. Ellie followed, her footsteps sure and steady. She called out that running was pointless, that she'd follow me anywhere, that sisters stayed together no matter what. The roof ended at a 2-story drop. Below, Dad's concrete workshop floor offered no soft landing. Ellie approached slowly, pointing out the obvious danger. She suggested we step back, return to safety, that there were better ways to handle this. She revealed her backup plan. If I refused tonight, she'd wait. She'd continue building trust with our parents. She'd eventually convince them I needed help, that my paranoia was concerning. She'd already laid groundwork, mentioning my strange behavior to Dr. Martinez. The manipulation ran deeper than I'd realized. Every interaction had been calculated, every word chosen to build her narrative. She'd been playing a long game, ensuring multiple paths to her goal. She sat on the roof's edge, legs dangling over the drop. She explained that she understood my fear of change, that she'd felt it too before her first cut, but that fear was just weakness leaving the body, that beauty required sacrifice. She described her dreams in vivid detail, how she saw faces as layered masks, how she could perceive the exhaustion beneath everyone's skin, how she felt called to help others see what she saw. The delusion ran bone deep. I noticed the sky lightening in the east. Dawn was coming. Ellie noticed too and suggested we finish before our parents woke, before the day's obligations interfered. She stood, approaching with renewed purpose. She promised this would be our secret, that she'd help me hide the healing process, that she'd teach me her concealer techniques, that no one would know until the results were perfect. The conspiracy she imagined between us was complete. I grabbed another loose shingle, holding it like a shield. Ellie laughed softly, pointing out its inadequacy. She demonstrated by running the scalpel across her own palm, opening a thin red line. Pain didn't register on her face. She'd moved beyond such concerns. She wrapped her bleeding hand in her pajama sleeve, never breaking eye contact. She explained that pain was just information, that it could be processed and dismissed, that I'd learned this truth through experience. The blood soaked through the fabric quickly. She glanced at it with mild interest, noting that she'd gone deeper than intended. That excitement had made her careless. She pressed the wound closed with practiced efficiency. She suggested we make a deal. One small cut tonight just to prove it wasn't so bad. Then I could decide about further procedures. She promised to respect my decision after that. The lie was transparent, but she seemed to believe it. She described how she'd felt after her first successful procedure. The euphoria of transformation, the power of taking control, how she'd finally felt beautiful. Her eyes shone with fervor as she relived the memory. I heard a door slam somewhere below. Our parents were waking up. Ellie heard it too and moved faster. She closed the distance between us, the scalpel raised. She whispered that we were running out of time, that this needed to happen now. I swung the shingle at her hand. It connected solidly, sending the scalpel spinning off the roof. Ellie gasped, cradling her injured hand. For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised. The careful control cracked slightly. She recovered quickly, pulling out a second scalpel from her other pocket. She complimented my quick thinking while explaining she always carried backups. That preparation was key to success. The lesson felt surreal given the circumstances. Mom's voice called from inside the house. She was looking for us, concern evident in her tone. Ellie glanced toward the window, calculating. She suggested we go inside and pretend everything was normal, that we could continue this later. I screamed for Mom, loud and desperate. Ellie moved to cover my mouth, but I dodged. She whispered urgently that I was ruining everything, that Mom wouldn't understand, that this was between sisters. More voices joined Mom's. Dad was awake too, searching the house. Ellie's composure cracked further. She muttered about interference, about ruined plans. The scalpel shook slightly in her grip. She made one last attempt, lunging forward with desperate precision. I fell backward, rolling down the roof slope. The gutter caught me again, groaning under the impact. Ellie pursued, but her foot caught on a loose shingle. The roof standoff has turned into a twisted infomercial where Ellie's pitching facial surgery like it's a limited time offer, complete with before and after photos on her phone and everything. She tumbled past me, her scream cut short by impact with the garage roof below. The scalpel flew from her hand, disappearing into the garden. She lay still for a moment, then groaned and tried to sit up. Our parents burst out the back door, finally alert to the crisis. Dad spotted us immediately and ran for his ladder. Mom stood frozen, trying to process her daughters on the roof. The sedatives had worn off, leaving them confused but functional. Ellie struggled to stand on the lower roof, favoring her left ankle. She called up that she was fine, that we were just talking, that I'd overreacted to a sisterly conversation. Even injured, she maintained her facade. Dad's ladder hit the garage roof with a clang. He climbed quickly, reaching Ellie first. She tried to explain, spinning a story about me sleepwalking onto the roof, about following me to ensure my safety. Dad's expression showed he wasn't buying it. Mom helped me down from the higher roof, her her hands shaking. She kept asking what happened, why we were outside. I tried explaining, but the story sounded insane even to me. Ellie had hidden the evidence too well. Inside the house, chaos erupted. Ellie maintained her story about my sleepwalking, adding details about hearing me open the window and following to protect me. She limped dramatically, wincing with each step, playing up her injury to deflect questions. Dad wrapped ice around her ankle while Mom examined the cut on my arm. I pulled out my phone, showing them the photos I'd taken of Ellie's journal. Mom squinted at the screen, her face paling as she read the entries about removing the gray layer from my face. Ellie's expression hardened. She claimed the photos were old, from before her treatment, that I'd saved them to use against her. Dad found the second scalpel on the garage roof while retrieving his ladder. He held it up, demanding an explanation. Ellie's facade cracked slightly. She admitted to keeping it for emergencies, claiming she felt unsafe without protection. She spun a story about paranoia from her medication, about needing something to feel secure. Mom discovered the disabled garage door opener, the tampered white noise machine, the missing ladder in the shed. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Ellie's story. She adapted quickly, weaving new explanations, but the lies were becoming harder to maintain. I showed them the cut on my arm, explaining how Ellie had chased me with a scalpel. She countered that I'd cut myself on the roof, that she'd been trying to help. Her voice remained steady, but sweat beaded on her forehead. The morning light revealed fresh cuts on her jawline that she'd tried to cover with her hair. Dad checked their bedroom and found evidence of the sedative in their teacups. The residue at the bottom matched sleeping pills from the medicine cabinet. Ellie's explanation about helping them sleep better fell flat. Mom's hands shook as she realized how deeply they'd been manipulated. Ellie shifted tactics, breaking down in tears. She admitted to relapsing but blamed the pressure of recovery. She claimed I'd been distant, making her feel abandoned. That loneliness had triggered old behaviors. She begged for understanding, for another chance at treatment. I retrieved her hidden journal from the stuffed animal, showing our parents the detailed plans for my facial surgery, the sketches, the measurements, the step-by-step procedure she'd developed. Ellie lunged for the journal, but Dad intercepted her. Her mask slipped completely as she screamed about ruining months of research. Mom called Dr. Martinez's emergency line, getting through this time. She explained the situation while Ellie paced the kitchen, muttering about interference and missed opportunities. When Mom mentioned the scalpels, Ellie corrected her about the proper blade angles for facial incisions, revealing her continued obsession. The doorbell rang. 2 paramedics entered, followed by a psychiatric evaluation team. Ellie recognized them from her previous hospitalization. She straightened her posture, switching back to her compliant patient persona. She greeted them warmly, asking about their families, trying to establish rapport. They asked her direct questions about the night's events. She provided calm, rational answers that contradicted the evidence. When they pointed out inconsistencies, she adjusted her story smoothly, but the fresh cuts on her jaw, the scalpels, the detailed journal entries painted a clear picture. I showed them the photos of her self-harm progression, the supplement additions to my food, the mapped injection sites. Ellie watched silently, her fingers tapping against her thigh in a familiar pattern. She was counting, measuring, planning even now. The evaluation team recommended immediate hospitalization. Ellie nodded agreeably, saying she understood their concern. She packed a bag methodically, folding clothes with precision. When she thought no one was looking, she slipped something into her pocket. Dad caught her and found a small blade from his razor, carefully wrapped in tissue. As they prepared to leave, Ellie approached me. The paramedics tensed, ready to intervene. She studied my face one last time, her fingers twitching with the urge to trace those familiar patterns. She whispered that she'd perfect the technique, that she'd return when ready, that I'd thank her someday. Mom rode with her in the ambulance while Dad and I followed in the car. At the hospital, Ellie underwent a thorough evaluation. The psychiatrist noted her deterioration since the previous admission. Her obsession had deepened, become more sophisticated. The treatment plan would need significant adjustment. They placed her in a secure unit with enhanced monitoring. No sharp objects, no unsupervised access to medical supplies, no internet for researching surgical techniques. Ellie accepted each restriction calmly, already calculating workarounds. I saw it in her eyes, the wheels turning, adapting to new constraints. Over the following weeks, our house felt different. Mom installed locks on the medicine cabinet and kitchen drawers. Dad removed his tools from the garage, storing them at his office. They checked my room nightly, ensuring windows were secure and I was safe. The vigilance was exhausting but necessary. I attended therapy sessions to process the trauma. The therapist helped me understand that Ellie's illness wasn't my fault, that her fixation on me stemmed from her distorted thinking. But understanding didn't erase the fear. I still checked shadows, still startled at unexpected sounds. Ellie's letters arrived weekly from the hospital. At first, they seemed normal, discussing her treatment progress and apologizing for her behavior. But hidden in seemingly innocent paragraphs were references to facial anatomy, mentions of new techniques she'd learned from other patients, observations about the staff's appearance. The hospital increased her medication and restricted her correspondence. The letters stopped, but Mom received calls about Ellie's behavior. She'd been teaching other patients about pressure points, demonstrating where to find major blood vessels. She'd fashioned tools from everyday items, showing remarkable creativity. During a family therapy session, Ellie appeared via video link. She looked healthier, the cuts on her jaw healed to faint lines. She spoke about understanding her illness better, about wanting to repair our relationship. But when the therapist asked about her obsession with appearance, her eyes lit up with that familiar intensity. She launched into a detailed explanation of facial structure, describing new theories she'd developed during treatment. The therapist tried redirecting her, but Ellie continued, her words flowing faster. She'd been studying, observing, planning. The obsession hadn't faded, it had evolved. The session ended abruptly when Ellie began describing modifications she wanted to make to the therapist's face. The screen went dark as staff intervened. Mom sobbed in the parking lot afterward while Dad made calls about long-term care facilities. The hospital wasn't equipped for Ellie's level of fixation. I returned to school, trying to maintain normalcy. But rumors had spread about that night on the roof. Classmates whispered, pointed, kept their distance. Even teachers looked at me differently, their smiles tinged with pity. The story had become distorted in retelling, but the core truth remained. My sister had tried to cut my face. Mom quit her job to focus on Ellie's care. She spent hours researching treatment options, consulting specialists, seeking answers. Dad threw himself into work, coming home later each night. Family dinners became silent affairs. The empty chair a constant reminder. I moved into the basement, converting Dad's old office into a bedroom. The windows were smaller, more secure. I installed extra locks, kept my phone charged, and within reach always. always. The precautions felt excessive but necessary. Ellie had proven her patience, her ability to wait and plan. Updates from the treatment facility were mixed. Ellie participated in therapy, but remained fixated on her theories. She'd developed a following among other patients, teaching them about the gray layer beneath their skin. Staff separated her from the group after several patients attempted self-harm. During supervised phone calls, Ellie sounded different. Her voice was flat, medicated into compliance. She asked about my appearance, whether the dark circles had worsened. When I deflected, she'd calculate silently, planning interventions she could no longer perform. Mom aged years and months. She blamed herself for missing the signs, for praising Ellie's dedication to skincare. She removed all mirrors from the house, unable to look at her reflection without remembering Ellie's obsession. Dad started sleeping in the guest room, their marriage strained by guilt and fear. I graduated early, eager to leave for college. Ellie's making friends at the facility by teaching Surgery 101 with office supplies while her parents turn their house into Fort Knox. Talk about a family that takes home security to new heights after one bad roof party. The acceptance letter to a school across the country felt like freedom. Mom cried when I told her, understanding but heartbroken. Dad helped me pack, slipping pepper spray and personal alarms into my boxes. The night before leaving, I visited Ellie one last time. She sat in the common room, watching a nature documentary about metamorphosis. She turned when I entered, her eyes immediately scanning my face. The familiar mapping gesture started before she caught herself. We sat in silence, the weight of everything between us. She asked about my plans, my classes, my future. Normal questions delivered in that flat, medicated tone. But underneath, I heard the calculations, the persistent obsession waiting for an opportunity. As I left, she called out a promise to get better, to be the sister I deserved. But her fingers traced patterns on her thigh, marking invisible incision points. The obsession lived on, buried but not gone. The treatment had taught her to hide it better, nothing more. I drove away the next morning, watching home disappear in the rearview mirror. Mom waved from the porch, Dad's arm around her shoulders. They looked older, worn down by months of crisis, but they were trying, rebuilding their life around Ellie's absence. College offered anonymity and distance. I told no one about Ellie, crafting a careful history that omitted the darkness. But late at night, I'd wake to phantom sensations of her fingers mapping my face. The trauma lingered, woven into my DNA like her obsession was woven into hers. Months passed. Mom's calls grew less frequent, the updates more routine. Ellie remained in treatment, her condition stable but unchanged. She'd stopped mentioning faces, stopped teaching others her theories. The doctors called it progress. I recognized it as adaptation. Then one night, a package arrived at my dorm. No return address, but I knew. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a medical textbook, facial anatomy, with certain pages bookmarked. Hidden between chapters were handwritten notes in Ellie's precise script. New theories, refined techniques, patient observations. The final note was brief: for when you're ready, I can wait. I burned everything in the dorm's fireplace, watching her words turn to ash. But the message was clear. She hadn't given up. She'd simply learned patience, playing the long game. Somewhere in that treatment facility, she was waiting, planning, perfecting her technique for the day she'd be free. I changed my phone number, had mail forwarded through the school. I avoided social media, anything that might leave a trail, but I knew these were temporary measures. Ellie had proven her dedication, her ability to find ways around any obstacle. The dark circles under my eyes deepened from lost sleep. Every mirror became a reminder of her obsession, every tired expression a target she'd marked. I learned to apply concealer with shaking hands, hiding the exhaustion that made me vulnerable in her eyes. My roommate asked about my family once. I crafted a simple lie about distance and busy schedules. The truth was too heavy, too strange to share. Who would believe that my sister wanted to surgically remove my tiredness? That she saw gray layers beneath everyone's skin? I excelled in my studies, driven by the need to build a life she couldn't touch. But success felt hollow when I couldn't share it with my family. Mom's birthday passed with only a carefully worded card. Dad's promotion went uncelebrated. The distance necessary for safety became its own prison. Spring break approached, and classmates made plans to return home. I signed up for volunteer work, anything to avoid that house full of memories. Mom understood without my explaining. She mentioned Ellie was doing better, participating in art therapy. She didn't mention what Ellie drew. Late one evening, an unknown number called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Silence on the other end, then familiar humming. Our childhood lullaby, the same tune from that night in the bathroom. My blood froze as I recognized the rhythm, the slight catch in her voice on certain notes. I hung up and reported the call to the facility. They assured me Ellie had no phone access, that it must be a coincidence. But I knew better. She'd found a way, as she always did. The game continued, even from behind locked doors. That night, I sat in my dorm room, doors locked and lights blazing. Outside, other students laughed and talked, living normal lives. Inside, I waited for dawn, for the safety of daylight. The exhaustion showed in my reflection, dark circles she'd love to eliminate. I thought about the future, about careers and relationships, and all the normal things I should want. But everything felt overshadowed by the knowledge that somewhere, Ellie was waiting, planning, perfecting her technique for the day our paths would cross again. The scars on my arm had faded to thin white lines, barely visible unless you knew where to look, but the deeper wounds remained fresh. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. Every sharp object carried potential threat. The hypervigilance exhausted me, creating the very tiredness she'd wanted to cure. I started seeing the campus counselor, carefully editing my story to seem less extreme. We worked on coping strategies, on building a sense of safety. But how do you feel safe when the threat comes from someone who loves you? When their twisted care makes them more dangerous than any stranger? Summer arrived with its own challenges. Mom begged me to visit just for a week. Dad offered to pay for a hotel, understanding why I couldn't stay at the house. But proximity to Ellie, even with her hospitalized, felt too risky. I made excuses about internships and stayed on campus. The isolation wore on me. I watched other students reunite with families while I remained alone. But loneliness felt safer than the alternative. I threw myself into research, into building a future far from Ellie's reach. Each achievement was a step away from her influence. Then came the call that changed everything. Mom's voice shook as she explained that Ellie had made significant progress. The doctors were recommending transition to outpatient treatment. She'd have supervised housing, continued therapy, strict monitoring, but she'd have freedom of movement. The news hit like a physical blow. All my careful distance might not be enough. Ellie would be in the world again, with her obsessions and patience and refined techniques. Mom assured me there were safeguards, legal restrictions, professional oversight, but we both knew Ellie's creativity in circumventing obstacles. I spent the night planning contingencies, new locks for my dorm, self-defense classes, emergency contacts programmed into my phone. The preparations felt both excessive and insufficient. How do you prepare for someone who's spent years planning their approach? A week later, another package arrived. Inside was a photo of my dorm building, taken from across the street. No message, no return address, but the implication was clear. She knew where I was. The careful anonymity I'd built meant nothing. She'd found me, as I'd always known she would. I contacted campus security, filed reports, created paper trails. They increased patrols, noted my concerns, promised vigilance. But what could they do against someone who looked normal, who could play the concerned sister perfectly? Ellie's greatest weapon was her ability to seem sane when needed. The photo changed everything. I couldn't focus on studies, couldn't sleep without checking locks repeatedly. Every face in crowds might be her. Every footstep in the hall made my heart race. The exhaustion deepened those dark circles she'd been so eager to fix. I considered transferring schools, changing my name, disappearing completely. But running felt like surrendering to her obsession. I'd built a life here, earned my place through hard work. Should I abandon it all because she couldn't abandon her fixation? Mom called with updates on Ellie's transition. She had a job at a library, was attending outpatient therapy, taking her medication faithfully. The report sounded positive, hopeful even, but I remembered her ability to perform normalcy, to hide her true thoughts behind compliance. My grades began slipping as paranoia consumed my focus. Professors noticed, offered extensions and support. I couldn't explain that I was waiting for my sister to appear with surgical tools and promises of beauty. The truth sounded insane even to me. Then one morning, I found a note under my door. Ellie's handwriting, explaining she was in town for a medical conference. She wanted to meet, to show me how much she'd improved, to apologize properly for the fear she'd caused. The reasonableness of the request made it more terrifying. I didn't respond, but she kept writing. Daily notes slipped under my door, each one maintaining that calm, rational tone. She understood my hesitation. She respected my boundaries. She just wanted 5 minutes to prove she'd changed. The persistence hidden beneath politeness was chilling. Campus security couldn't do anything about notes. She hadn't threatened me, hadn't violated any laws. She was just a sister trying to reconnect. They suggested I consider meeting her in a public place, with security present. The idea made my skin crawl. The notes evolved, including medical articles about new treatments for exhaustion, revolutionary techniques that didn't involve surgery. She thought I'd find them interesting, given our shared history. Each article was highlighted, annotated with her observations. The obsession hadn't faded. It had found new expression. I started sleeping in the library, in study rooms with locking doors. Other students assumed I was stressed about finals. I let them believe it, easier than explaining the truth. But even surrounded by people, I felt her presence like a weight on my chest. One evening, returning late from class, I found her waiting outside my dorm. Well, nothing says I've really grown as a person, quite like mailing creepy packages with no return address, and leaving daily notes under someone's door like the world's most persistent newsletter subscription that nobody asked. She looked different, healthier, calmer, wearing professional clothes from her library job. She raised her hands peacefully, showing empty palms. No tools, no weapons, just her twisted love and patience. She spoke softly about understanding my fear, about the harm she'd caused. The apology sounded genuine, practiced but heartfelt. She'd learned so much in treatment, understood her illness better. She wanted to make amends, to be the sister I deserved. I stood frozen as she described her new life, the job she enjoyed, the apartment she'd decorated, the cooking classes she'd started taking, normal details that should have been reassuring but felt like camouflage. Underneath the performance, I saw her eyes tracking my face, noting the exhaustion. She mentioned new research in sleep science, non-invasive treatments for chronic fatigue. Her voice carried enthusiasm, but I heard the underlying message. She hadn't abandoned the mission, just changed tactics. The obsession had evolved, adapted to circumvent the barriers treatment had built. Security arrived, responding to my earlier alert. Ellie stepped back gracefully, apologizing for the surprise visit. She handed them a business card, explaining she worked at the medical library downtown, just hoping to reconnect with family. Their sympathy was visible as they looked between us. She left peacefully, calling out that she'd wait to hear from me. No pressure, no timeline, just patience and the certainty that eventually I'd need what she offered. The confidence in her voice made my stomach turn. She knew something I didn't, had plans I couldn't see. That night, I called Mom in tears. She listened as I described the encounter, the evolved obsession, the fear that wouldn't fade. She offered to fly out, to intervene somehow. But what could she do? Ellie wasn't breaking any laws, wasn't technically threatening me. She was just existing in my vicinity with her twisted love. I made it through finals on autopilot, then packed everything I owned. The summer internship in another state felt like escape. I left no forwarding address, told no one my plans. But as I drove away, I knew it was temporary. Ellie had proven her ability to find me. The new city offered brief respite. I focused on work, on building professional connections, on pretending to be normal. But every reflective surface showed those dark circles, the exhaustion that marked me as her unfinished project. No amount of concealer could hide what she saw. Weeks passed peacefully. I began to relax, to believe I'd bought myself time. Then I saw her at a coffee shop, reading a medical journal. She didn't approach, didn't acknowledge me, just sat there, existing in my space, letting me know she'd found me again. The game continued. She appeared at restaurants, bookstores, always maintaining distance, always seeming coincidental. She never spoke to me, never made contact, just reminded me of her presence, her patience, her unfinished work. I considered legal options, but what evidence did I have? A sister who happened to live in the same city, who frequented the same public spaces. The story of our past sounded unbelievable, and her current behavior was perfectly legal. The system wasn't designed for this kind of threat. My internship supervisor noticed my distraction, my exhaustion. She suggested I take some time off, rest, and recharge. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rest was impossible when Ellie waited in the shadows, planning the perfect moment to cure my tiredness permanently. I started carrying pepper spray, taking self-defense classes, varying my routines, but these felt like bandages on a wound that wouldn't heal. The real damage was psychological. The constant vigilance, the inability to trust, the isolation her obsession created. One night, unable to sleep, I researched facial anatomy myself, trying to understand her obsession, to find logic in the madness. The medical texts were dense, complex, but I began to see patterns. The layers she described did exist in a way. Her delusion had roots in reality, twisted twisted into something monstrous. Understanding didn't bring peace. If anything, it made her more dangerous. She wasn't completely delusional. She'd taken real medical knowledge and warped it through her broken lens. The intelligence behind her obsession made it harder to dismiss, harder to fight. My internship ended with an offer for full-time employment, a chance to build a career, to establish myself professionally. But accepting meant staying in this city where Ellie had already found me. Moving meant starting over again, running forever. I chose to stay, not from courage, but from exhaustion. Running hadn't worked. Distance hadn't protected me. Maybe facing her, maintaining boundaries while building my life, was the only option left. The decision felt like surrender and defiance simultaneously. I found an apartment with excellent security, multiple locks, cameras in the hallways. My neighbors thought I was paranoid about break-ins. I let them believe it. Easier than explaining I was hiding from my sister's love. The precautions provided minimal comfort. Ellie maintained her distance, but her presence was constant, a shadow at the edge of my life, waiting for weakness. I saw her at professional events, always appropriate, always networking. She'd built her own life parallel to mine, close enough to monitor, far enough to seem respectful. The standoff stretched on, two sisters circling each other, one armed with patience and obsession, the other with fear and determination. She sent holiday cards with generic messages. I didn't respond, but couldn't throw them away. Evidence, maybe, or reminders of what love looked like when twisted through mental illness. Mom visited once, trying to bridge the gap between us. She looked older, worn by years of managing Ellie's illness and my absence. She didn't push for reconciliation, but asked me to consider forgiveness. I couldn't explain that forgiveness required safety I'd never have. Dad called monthly, careful conversations about work and weather. He mentioned Ellie sometimes, her progress and setbacks. She'd been promoted at the library, was respected in her field. The normalcy of her life made my fears seem irrational, but I knew better. Years passed in this careful dance. I advanced in my career, even attempted relationships. But intimacy was difficult when you couldn't explain why your sister terrified you, why family gatherings were impossible, why you checked locks obsessively and startled at unexpected touches. Ellie evolved too. Her letters became scholarly articles about facial structure and perception, published research that skirted the edge of her obsession while maintaining academic credibility. She'd found a way to explore her fixation professionally, legitimately. I read every article, looking for threats hidden in footnotes, but they were genuinely well-researched, contributing to her field. She'd channeled her obsession into something productive, almost admirable, but I knew the darkness that drove her curiosity. The exhaustion she'd wanted to cure became chronic. Years of hypervigilance, of broken sleep and constant fear had worn me down. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Her obsession had created the very condition she'd wanted to fix. Sometimes I wondered if giving in would be easier, letting her perform whatever procedure she'd perfected, ending this endless waiting. But I knew that would only validate her delusion, encourage her to help others. My resistance protected potential future victims. The game continued, year after year. Two sisters locked in a pattern neither could break. Her patience against my persistence. Her love twisted into something dangerous. My fear hardened into armor. We orbited each other like binary stars. Unable to escape the gravitational pull of shared history, I built a life despite her shadow. Professional success, careful friendships, a existence carved out in the spaces she couldn't reach, but always with one eye on the door, one hand near my phone, ready for the day her patience finally ended. She sent a final letter on what would have been our grandmother's birthday. A single line. I'm still waiting when you're ready. No threats, no pressure, just the promise that her offer remained open, that her obsession endured, that somewhere in her mind, she still saw gray layers beneath my skin. I kept the letter in my safe with the others. Evidence of a love so twisted it became horror. Proof that family could be the deepest threat. A reminder that some wounds never heal. They just teach you to live differently. The exhaustion showed in every mirror, dark circles that no amount of rest could cure, but I wore them like armor now, proof of my survival. Let her see them and plan. I'd survived her worst already. I could survive her patience too. My life continued, shaped by her shadow, but not consumed by it. I learned to find joy in small victories, peace in secured spaces. The fear became background noise, always present but no longer deafening. I'd never be free, but I could be functional. And somewhere across the city, Ellie waited, patient as stone, certain as gravity, planning procedures she'd never perform, perfecting techniques she'd never use. Two sisters bound by blood and obsession, circling each other forever in a dance of love and fear. The dark circles deepened with each passing year, but I'd learned to see them differently, not as exhaustion to be cured, but as evidence of endurance. Proof that I'd survived her love and would continue surviving it. That's the thing about family. You can't escape them, not really. You can only learn to live with the damage, to build walls strong enough to contain their impact, to find peace in the spaces between contact, strength in the distance you maintain. Ellie would always be out there, waiting with her scalpels and theories, and I'd always be here, lock secured and pepper spray ready. Two sisters forever frozen in a moment of almost violence, neither able to move forward, neither willing to step back. The exhaustion was real, the fear was real, but so was my determination to deny her the satisfaction of fixing me. Some things are meant to remain broken. Some love is too dangerous to accept. And so we continued, year after year, in our careful dance. Her obsession and my resistance, perfectly balanced. A horror story with no ending, just an eternal middle. Two sisters who loved each other wrong, trapped in patterns neither could break. The dark circles remained, deeper now, permanent, but they were mine. Evidence of my choices, my survival, my refusal to let her love destroy me. She could wait forever. I'd resist just as long. That's what family does sometimes. They teach you the weight of love, the danger of care taken too far. They show you that the deepest wounds come from the gentlest hands, that sometimes the only victory is in the resistance itself. Thanks for reading this story with me. It's been something else.